She never imagined her wedding day would end like this. Barefoot on the sidewalk, her lace hem torn and muddied, one earring missing, her heart pounding so hard it felt like her chest might splinter. The sunlight that filtered through the white tulle canopy just hours ago now glared down harshly, exposing the tear-streaked ruin of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Ava clutched her phone with one hand and her sister's trembling fingers with the other, her knuckles white against the worn metal of Emma's wheelchair. They had thrown her out, not politely, not quietly, but publicly, with gasps from guests and a sharp gasp from the string quartet as the music faltered. "You chose that girl over this family?" Her future mother-in-law had spat, each syllable dripping with disgust. "Then you can leave with her." That girl, her sister, Emma, whose spine had been shattered in a crash that took everything but her ability to smile. Emma, who couldn't speak anymore, but whose eyes still radiated trust, fear, and devotion in equal measure. Ava had planned everything with her in mind. A front-row seat with space for her wheels. Ramps arranged. A bouquet looped with Emma's favorite yellow ribbon. But it wasn't enough. Not when the groom's family entered the church and saw Emma sitting there in her pale blue dress, hands folded neatly in her lap, unable to kneel, unable to clap. Ava had seen the stares, heard the whispers. She'd ignored them, until the usher whispered back to her that there was a request to move the girl to the back. Ava had refused. "She's my sister," she said, loud enough for the guests near her to hear. "She stays beside me." That's when the unraveling began. The groom's aunt stood. Then his cousin. A woman from the choir cleared her throat, and suddenly Ava's vision narrowed, like a tunnel closing around her as voices rose and people stepped away. No one defended her. No one called for Noah. She turned, searching for his eyes, his comfort, his strength. But he was gone. Vanished. And the silence that followed was deafening. 2 minutes later, she and Emma were on the street. Just like that. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" his mother had snapped as the door shut behind them. "You've embarrassed all of us." The door slammed. Music resumed. From outside, they could hear faint laughter. Ava stood frozen. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exclusion, ugly, raw exclusion. "I'm so sorry, Em," she whispered, crouching beside her sister, brushing back a strand of hair that had come loose from Emma's braid. "I didn't know they'd—" Her voice broke. Emma blinked slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. She hadn't spoken in 4 years, but she didn't need words. Her hand trembled in Ava's grasp. "This wasn't your fault," Ava said fiercely, looking her straight in the eye. "Do you hear me? This is not your fault." A catering staffer, maybe 19, maybe kind, slipped outside and handed them a bottle of water. That was the only act of kindness anyone had shown them all day. Ava took it and nodded silently, swallowing down the rising lump in her throat. Her phone buzzed. It was Noah. She didn't want to look, but she did. "Noah, where are you?" Noah, "Mom's freaking out." Noah, "Don't be dramatic, just come back in and apologize." Her thumb hovered over the screen, shaking. He wasn't asking if she was hurt, or scared, or even okay. He just wanted her to fall back into place. The pretty bride, the silent sister, the quiet shame. Number no more. She scrolled past Noah's name, past her bridesmaids, past friends who would never risk taking sides. And then she saw a name she hadn't touched in years. Mason. It had been 3 years since they'd last spoken, but his last words to her had never left her. "If you're ever really in trouble, call me. I mean it." They'd been friends once, almost more. But life had taken them in different directions, and she hadn't wanted to complicate things with feelings she couldn't afford. But now, with her dress clinging to her knees and her sister's wheelchair wheels covered in dirt, she tapped the name. 1 ring? 2? Her breath held. Then, hello? His voice hadn't changed. Deeper, maybe. Still gentle. Still warm. Mason? She whispered, trying not to cry. It's me. I don't know where else to go. There was a pause. And then, firm and certain. Where are you? She gave him the name of the church, the cross streets. And when she hung up, she turned to Emma and said softly, Help is coming. But neither of them knew yet that the moment she pressed that call, everything began to change. Not just the wedding, not just the day, but the future she thought was already written. Mason Carter didn't ask questions. He just drove. The second Ava's voice had cracked through the phone, he'd dropped the wrench in his hand, slid out from under the sedan he was fixing, and grabbed his keys. 10 minutes later, he was behind the wheel of his dusty pickup, engine growling down suburban streets he hadn't driven in years. He didn't know why she was at a church, or why her voice had trembled like that. But something in him had surged. An old muscle memory of protecting her of showing up when others didn't. They hadn't spoken since the night she'd called off whatever they almost were. Life got complicated, she'd said. Emma needed her. Mason had understood. He'd walked away. But he'd never stopped wondering if she was okay. And now, she wasn't. That much was clear. He pulled up to the curb in front of the stone church, just as the laughter from inside drifted out with cruel lightness. It was a wedding reception, no doubt about it. Bubbles clung to the doorframe, music thudded beneath layers of laughter, and women in pastel dresses milled about with champagne flutes. But there, on the far edge of the sidewalk, Ava stood with her back to the building, clutching the handles of her sister's wheelchair like a lifeline. Her veil was gone. Her dress was wrinkled and dirty, her hair half fallen from its bun. But what hit him hardest was her expression, somewhere between heartbreak and defiance. Emma sat beside her, face turned down, fingers nervously twisting the ribbon on her lap. Mason killed the engine, stepped out, and walked up without a word. Ava turned slowly, and when her eyes met his, her face crumpled. Not into tears, but into a breath so sharp it seemed to let go of days she'd been holding in. Hey, he said softly. Hey, she echoed, voice barely holding. He looked at Emma and gave a nod. Hi, Em. Emma blinked at him. Recognition flashed in her eyes. He knelt beside her, the way he used to when she was learning to hold a spoon again. You okay if I help your sister for a while? Emma gave a tiny nod, eyes shining. Mason stood and looked at Ava. Let's go. Where? She asked. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with dignity. She hesitated, glancing back at the church. They said she didn't belong in the front. And when I wouldn't move her, they said I didn't belong either. Mason clenched his jaw. Sounds like they did you a favor. I was supposed to marry him today, she said quietly. Noah. You still want to? Her eyes dropped. No. Then get in. He opened the passenger door, helped her get Emma situated in the back seat where he'd laid out a blanket and gently tucked a pillow against the door. He handled her with a care that felt almost reverent, as if Emma were more precious than porcelain. Ava slid in beside her, hands trembling in her lap. As they pulled away, Mason didn't speak. He didn't ask for the full story. He just let the silence stretch while Ava's breath evened out and her shoulders relaxed by degrees. After a few minutes, he said, I was changing brake pads when you called. Pretty sure I left the whole axle hanging. She let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. Still at Lewis's garage. Still there, still underpaid, but I like it. You could have ignored the call. Couldn't. Why? Because I meant what I said, Ava. If you ever needed me, I'd come. She stared at the dashboard, her voice barely audible. I didn't think anyone would. Then they're fools. They drove toward the edge of town, past the newer neighborhoods, and into the quieter stretches where old oaks leaned over the roads and wildflowers split cracks in the pavement. Ava watched the trees go by, her thoughts tangled. I think I loved him because it was safe, predictable. His family had money. They said they'd take care of Emma, too. But then, one inconvenience and it all cracked. That's not love. That's convenience with a tux. She laughed again, more solidly this time. You always did call it straight. Still do. They reached an old gas station-turned diner, quiet and familiar. Mason parked in the shade, walked around to open Ava's door, and helped Emma into a waiting wheelchair he borrowed from inside. The waitress recognized him. Got a table in the back if y'all want privacy? He nodded. Once seated, with coffee steaming between them and Emma settled beside them, sipping ginger ale through a straw, Ava finally exhaled. I don't know what happens next. Mason leaned forward. You already did the hard part. You left. I didn't have a plan. Sometimes walking away is the plan. She looked at him then. Really looked. Why are you being so kind? His gaze didn't waver. Because no one should ever be kicked out of their own wedding for loving their sister, and because I've been waiting a long time to sit across from you again. Ava's lips parted, stunned into silence. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time all day, she didn't feel alone. The coffee grew cold between them, untouched. Ava sat across from Mason, her hands wrapped around the mug like it might still offer warmth. Emma sat beside her, slowly picking at a piece of toast Mason had ordered for her, occasionally glancing at Ava like a child reading her mother's emotions. The diner was quiet. Just the low hum of the cooler and the occasional scrape of fork on plate from a man reading a newspaper 2 booths down. Mason leaned back in the booth, his arms stretched along the top edge, watching Ava carefully. You're still shivering, he said. You want my jacket? She shook her head, but said nothing. Her mind wasn't in that booth, not entirely. It was still stuck in the church, playing the scene over again. The laughter, the gasps, the look on her mother-in-law's face. And worst of all, Noah's silence. You know what hurt the most? Ava said finally, eyes down. He didn't even come outside. Mason didn't speak. She looked up at him. He texted me, Mason. He asked why I was being dramatic. Dramatic. Her voice cracked on the word. After they threw me out like I was nothing. Then he was never your partner, Mason said. A partner fights beside you, not behind you, not after the fact. Ava looked down again. She reached into the small clutch bag she'd somehow kept through it all and pulled out a folded photo, creased and faded. She laid it on the table. Mason leaned forward, recognizing it instantly. It was from 5 years ago, the 3 of them on the porch of her old house. Ava in a sundress, Emma beside her with a wide grin and braces on her legs, Mason seated below them, arms wrapped around both sisters. He remembered the moment clearly. Emma had just finished her first week of physical therapy without crying. They'd celebrated with lemonade and cookies. I've carried this for years, she said. Even when I got engaged. Even when his mother said to put the past away. I kept this with me. Then maybe deep down, Mason said gently, you already knew who your real people were. Ava traced her finger along the edge of the photo. Emma never liked him. Not once. She always tensed around him, you know, but she never said anything. couldn't, and I ignored her anyway. I told myself she just needed time. But it wasn't time, she knew. She felt what you couldn't admit yet, Mason said. Some people do. Ava looked at Emma. I don't know how long she's been waiting for me to see it. Emma, as if sensing her sister's gaze, looked up and smiled. Small, tired, but full of something Ava hadn't seen in her since the accident. Relief. You made the right call today, Mason said, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. I feel like I ruined everything. You didn't ruin it, he said. You saved it. You saved her. You saved yourself. The waitress came by with a fresh pot. Need a top-up, hun? Please, Ava murmured. When she was gone, Ava looked at Mason. Do you think it's possible to rebuild from this? Like, really rebuild? Mason reached into his own wallet, pulled out something and slid it across the table. Ava unfolded it. It was a photo, newer than hers. A rebuilt 1965 Mustang, gleaming red. Took me 4 years, he said. Bought it for $600. Every panel was rusted. The engine was shot. People told me to sell it for scrap. But you didn't. Number I saw what it could be. And now, it's the best car in town. She smiled, then chuckled softly. You're comparing my life to an old Mustang? If the engine's good, everything else can be rebuilt. Even the frame, even the wiring. She looked at him with a steadiness that hadn't been there earlier. And you think I've still got a good engine? He grinned. You're still Ava Whitmore. You've got more strength in you than most people ever will. She fell quiet, the weight of his words settling somewhere deep inside her. It had been a long time since someone had seen her clearly, without condition, without expectation. Thank you, she whispered. For coming. For not asking 100 questions. For just being here. You don't need to thank me, he said. I told you, I'd come. That'll never change. Ava tucked the photo back into her purse, then reached over and took Emma's hand. We'll be okay, she said aloud, not just to reassure her sister, but to remind herself. And for the first time since she was pushed through those double doors, she almost believed it. Almost. The next morning broke slow and gray, the kind of sky that pressed down rather than opened up. Ava hadn't slept much, but she'd stayed curled on the couch in Mason's modest living room, with Emma tucked under a fleece throw nearby. Both of them cocooned in a fragile kind of quiet. Mason had offered the couch without hesitation and taken the floor himself, stretching out beside the bookshelf with an old quilt and a stubborn loyalty that made Ava feel both safe and unsteady. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the way Noah's mother's voice had sliced through the church air, the hush that followed, the soft squeak of Emma's wheelchair as she was ushered out like a shameful secret. It didn't feel real. Not until her phone buzzed again. 10 messages overnight. All from Noah. We can talk about this. You're making a scene. Don't ruin everything over one misunderstanding. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She had seen what she needed to see. But now she was left with the question that had been circling her since last night. What now? The knock at the door came just after 9 a.m. Mason had gone out to pick up breakfast, oatmeal for Emma, coffee and something warm for Ava, and she assumed it was him returning early. She opened the door with a soft smile, ready to tease him for forgetting his keys. But her smile dropped. Standing on the porch was not Mason. It was Noah. Suit wrinkled, tie crooked, eyes tired. He held a bouquet of pale pink lilies, her favorite, the edges already beginning to wilt. Ava, he said softly, can we talk? She didn't move. Behind her, Emma shifted, and Ava instinctively stepped forward to block his line of sight. How did you find me? One of your bridesmaids saw you leave with a guy, he said. They said he worked at Lewis's garage. Wasn't hard to figure out. You followed me? I had to. No, she said sharply, voice rising. You had to yesterday, when they humiliated us, when your mother threw us out and you just stood there. I didn't know what to do, he said, taking a step forward. I was in shock. Everything happened so fast. I didn't mean for it to go that way. You didn't mean for your mother to treat my sister like she wasn't human? His eyes flinched. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. You could have walked out with me, but you stayed, you danced, you drank champagne. He looked down, defeated. I didn't know how to fix it. You don't fix something by pretending it didn't happen. She stepped out and closed the door softly behind her, lowering her voice so Emma wouldn't hear. Why are you really here, Noah? Because I love you, he said quickly. Because we had something. Because I want to make it right. You don't even know my sister. That's not fair. No, she snapped. What's not fair is that she's been through more than most adults ever will, and you couldn't even make room for her in one damn pew. He went quiet. The bouquet sagged in his hand. I made a mistake, he said at last. I was trying to manage a lot of expectations. My family's, yours, the guests. And where was your own? She asked. Where was your voice? He didn't answer. The silence between them widened. Then Ava saw Mason's truck coming up the street, her stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with clarity. Mason parked, spotted Noah, and hesitated only a moment before stepping out with a paper bag in hand. Morning, he said coolly. Morning, Noah replied stiffly. Mason turned to Ava. You okay? She nodded. He was just leaving. Noah's eyes flickered between them. So this is where we are now? Ava met his gaze. This is where I am. You made your choice yesterday. I'm making mine today. Noah's jaw tightened. You're throwing away everything we built? No, she said, voice calm. You threw it away the moment you let them treat Emma like she was disposable. I'm just refusing to pick up the pieces. She turned and walked back to the porch. Mason stayed where he was until the sound of Noah's car faded down the street. Then he walked up and handed her the bag. Still warm, he said gently. I got the good kind of oatmeal, the one with the raisins you hate. She laughed softly. Perfect. Inside, Emma was watching through the window. Ava crouched beside her and whispered, We're not going back, Em. Not ever. Her sister's eyes filled with tears. Not sadness. Relief. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying quiet. It's walking away with your head held high, and not turning back. By noon, the tension had finally begun to bleed from Ava's shoulders. The sun had broken through the clouds in soft beams that lit up Mason's modest kitchen, turning its mismatched tile floor and faded wooden cabinets into something cozy, almost warm. Emma was sitting at the table, tracing her finger around the rim of her juice glass, humming softly. It was a tune Ava remembered from childhood, something their mother used to sing while brushing their hair. That quiet little hum anchored her more than any grand gesture could. Ava leaned against the counter, watching her sister, letting the scent of fresh toast and cinnamon from Mason's pantry ease the tightness in her chest. Mason had stepped out again, this time to check on a client's car that had broken down outside the garage, promising to be back within the hour. For the first time in days, Ava felt like she could think without flinching. But then her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Noah. It was her father. She stared at the name on the screen. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years, not since he walked out after saying he couldn't live in a house that felt like a hospital. That had been his parting gift after Emma's accident. The sound of the door slamming behind him, leaving the three of them behind to carry the grief alone. Ava didn't answer. She let it go to voicemail, but curiosity chewed at her resolve. When it buzzed again, this time with a voicemail alert, she hesitated, then pressed play. Her father's voice crackled through the speaker. "Ava, I heard what happened at the wedding. From one of your cousins, I think. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have been there. I know I haven't been the kind of father you needed, but I didn't know what to do after Emma's injury. I was ashamed. Of myself, not of her. I didn't know how to be strong for both of you. But I heard what happened yesterday, and it made me realize that maybe it's not too late. If you'll let me, I want to see you. I want to see both of you. Please." The message ended. Ava stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the edge of the counter. Emma looked up from her seat, sensing the change in the room. "That was Dad," Ava said slowly. "He wants to see us." Emma blinked, then reached for her sketch pad, something she used when her emotions couldn't find words. She scribbled something, then held it up. "Do you want to?" Ava didn't answer right away. The truth was, she didn't know. Part of her ached at the thought of reconnecting. Another part still burned from the wound he'd left behind. But maybe that message was the one spark she needed to light something different. "Maybe," she said finally, "but not today. Today, we just breathe." Emma nodded, accepting that. Ava pocketed the phone and went to sit beside her, resting her head on her sister's shoulder. "It's strange," she murmured, "how quickly everything changes. One moment I was putting on a veil, and now this. A different life starting from the ashes of another." Emma reached up and gently brushed a strand of Ava's hair back behind her ear. That one small gesture said more than any speech could have. Just then, the front door opened, and Mason stepped in, brushing dust from his hands. "Got that Buick running again," he said with a tired grin. "Somehow it just needed a sharp elbow and a good swear." Ava smiled. "That sounds about right." He looked between the sisters, noting the subtle shift in energy. "Everything okay?" "I heard from my dad," Ava said. "First time in a long while." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You gonna see him?" "I'm thinking about it." "Take your time. Nobody gets to rush your healing." He walked over to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee, then offered one to Ava, who accepted with a grateful nod. They stood together in the kitchen, not speaking for a while, just sipping and listening to the soft tick of the clock above the pantry door. Finally, Mason said, "You know, when you left that church yesterday, you didn't just walk away from a wedding. You walked towards something better." "I just hope I'm not walking into another mess," she murmured. "If you are, you won't be alone in it." Ava looked up at him, and for a long moment neither of them looked away. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. "For being the one person who didn't hesitate." "Some things," Mason said, "are worth showing up for. You and Emma always have been." Ava didn't know what was coming next, if she'd rebuild bridges or burn them entirely. But she knew this. She had already begun the journey back to herself. And this time, she wasn't doing it alone. The wedding ring still sat in the velvet box on the dresser, untouched since the night Ava had tucked it away after the disaster. She hadn't been able to throw it out, not yet. But she couldn't bring herself to wear it either. It wasn't the ring's fault, after all. It was just metal, cut and polished into something people claimed meant forever. But what did forever even mean when it crumbled under pressure before the vows were spoken? That afternoon, while Mason worked on a transmission in the garage and Emma napped on the couch, Ava sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, the little black box open in her lap. The diamond glinted like it still belonged to someone. Maybe it never had. She remembered when Noah gave it to her, under a golden sky, a picnic set up by the river, a photographer hidden in the trees for that perfect engagement shot. It had been beautiful, but now she saw the planning for what it was, a performance. Every moment had been curated for optics, for likes and shares, for applause from people who would never see behind the scenes. She'd worn the ring like a badge of success, thinking it symbolized security and acceptance. Now, it only reminded her how quickly someone's love could dissolve when things got uncomfortable. She held it up to the window, letting the sunlight bounce through it. Then she stood and walked down the hall to the kitchen. On the counter sat a small tin where Mason tossed spare change and receipts. She picked it up, placed the ring inside, and pressed the lid shut. When Mason walked in later, covered in grease and smelling like gasoline and sun, he raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "I finally figured out where the ring belongs," she said, handing him the tin. He opened it, blinked, then looked at her. "Are you sure?" "Dead sure. I don't need it." He stared at the box for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Want me to get rid of it?" "Not yet. Just keep it away from me." "You got it." He slid it into a drawer without ceremony, then washed his hands and turned to her. "You did something big today." "It was just a ring." "No," he said, drying his hands. "It was a tether." She exhaled slowly. "Feels lighter without it." "You look lighter." Ava smiled. "You always this good at pep talks?" "Only when the audience deserves it." They shared a laugh, easy and warm. Emma stirred in the living room and called out in her own quiet way, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the table. Ava hurried to her side. "Hey, baby, you up?" Emma nodded, then held up a drawing she'd made earlier. It was a sketch of 3 stick figures, Ava, Emma, and a taller figure with messy hair, Mason. They were all holding hands, standing under a sun with a smiley face drawn above them. Ava felt her throat tighten. "You like it here?" she asked Emma softly. Emma pointed to the drawing and tapped twice. "Yes." Ava looked up as Mason stepped behind her. He saw the drawing, read it immediately, and knelt beside Emma. "You did this?" he asked. Emma nodded. "You're a better artist than me," he said, grinning, "and I've been trying for years." Emma giggled, a light, breathy sound that made Ava's eyes sting. "You've made her laugh more in 2 days than Noah did in 2 years, Ava whispered. "That's because I don't treat her like a burden," Mason said, still looking at Emma. "I treat her like a person." Ava felt something shift inside her. Not a dramatic epiphany, just a gentle unfolding, like a door opening after years of staying shut. She sat on the floor next to them and wrapped her arm around Emma's shoulders. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We always do." "You're already doing it," Mason said. "You walked away from the wrong thing. That's the first step to walking toward the right one." Ava looked at him. "And what if I have no idea what that right thing is yet?" "Then that's the adventure. You get to build it from scratch." "Even if I mess it up?" "Especially if you mess it up. That's how you know it's yours." Ava leaned her head on Emma's shoulder. The sun outside had shifted again, casting long golden stripes across the living room floor. It wasn't the future she planned. It wasn't perfect. But it felt real. And right now, real was enough. It wasn't until Sunday morning that Ava realized just how far the whispers had spread. She hadn't intended to go near the church again, had told herself she'd never set foot in that building after what had happened. But Emma had asked. Not with words, of course, but by picking up her Sunday dress from the closet and laying it out carefully on the bed. It was a dress Ava had bought for her 3 years ago, when things were still hopeful, when she believed they'd be welcomed as they were. Now, watching her sister's small hands smooth the fabric with a quiet kind of insistence, Ava understood that this wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming space. "You sure?" Ava had asked her softly. Emma nodded once. And so they dressed. Ava in a simple navy dress she hadn't worn since before the engagement, Emma in her lavender Sunday best. Mason, surprisingly, said nothing when they told him. He just offered to drive them. "I'll sit in the back if you want privacy," he said, but Ava shook her head. "You're part of this now." They arrived just after the bells rang, and as they walked through the church doors, a hush fell across the entryway. A few heads turned. A woman in a hat whispered something to her husband. Ava lifted her chin, pushed Emma's wheelchair forward, and kept walking. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. But what she saw next made her stop cold. Just outside the sanctuary doors, pinned to the announcement board, was a copy of the week's church bulletin. Printed across the top were the usual items: hymns, scriptures, upcoming events. But halfway down, in bold type, was a single line that made Ava's breath catch. "Please extend prayers for Ava Whitmore and Emma Whitmore as they begin a new journey. May our hearts learn to welcome as he would." She stared at the words, blinking. Mason read it over her shoulder. "That you?" She nodded slowly. "That's us. Looks like someone's trying to make it right." Ava didn't know whether to feel comforted or cautious. She turned to the usher at the door, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and kind eyes. He offered a small smile. We were wrong last week," he said quietly. "Not everyone agreed with how things went. Pastor Reynolds asked to include that note. He said grace belongs to the ones who've had it stolen." Ava swallowed hard. Emma reached out and tugged gently on her sister's sleeve, her expression calm but curious. "You want to go in?" Ava asked. Emma nodded. So they did. The sanctuary looked the same. High ceilings, light pouring through stained glass, pews lined with worn cushions. But this time, it felt different. People shifted. Some smiled, others looked away, unsure. Ava pushed Emma forward and found a spot near the front, not the very first pew, but close enough to show they weren't hiding. Mason sat behind them, quiet and steady. The service began. The pastor didn't mention them by name, but his sermon spoke of kindness, of humility, of the courage it takes to love those who are harder for the world to understand. Ava didn't cry, but she did grip Emma's hand tightly through most of it. At the end, as people filed out, an elderly woman with a crooked back and soft eyes stopped beside them. "I used to teach Sunday school," she said. "I had a student like your sister once, sweetest girl I ever met. She never spoke a word, but she always listened. And when I made a mistake, she was the only one who smiled like it was okay." She reached down and touched Emma's hand gently. "Welcome back, sweetheart." Emma smiled. Outside, the sun had warmed the stone steps. Ava stood for a moment, breathing in the crisp morning air, letting the light settle on her shoulders. She felt something loosen inside her, a knot she hadn't known was still there. Mason stepped beside her. "You good?" She nodded. "Better than I expected." "Still not going back to Noah, are you?" She gave him a look. "Not a chance." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "This was brave. Coming back here." "I didn't come back for them," she said. "I came back for her. So she knows she belongs." She looked at her sister, who was now watching a butterfly land on the church garden's hydrangeas, her face lit with wonder. "And maybe," Ava said, "so I remember I belong too." Mason smiled. You never stopped. And this time, Ava believed it. It arrived 2 days later in a pale cream envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was elegant, precise, the kind of cursive that came from finishing schools or formal thank you notes, not everyday life. Ava found it wedged in the mailbox between a coupon flyer and a veterinary reminder for a dog she didn't own. She almost tossed it aside, assuming it was some leftover wedding correspondence sent before the disaster. But something about the envelope made her pause. She brought it inside, sat at Mason's kitchen table while Emma sketched quietly at the counter, and opened it slowly, as if the contents might sting. Inside was a single sheet of fine stationery, thick and off-white, the ink a soft charcoal gray. Dear Ava, I doubt I deserve your time, let alone your forgiveness. But I'm writing anyway. Not to justify what happened, but to acknowledge it. You may never want to hear my name again, and I accept that. But I owe you an apology. I was cruel, not just in words, but in attitude. I saw your sister not as family, but as an inconvenience. I told myself I was protecting our image, our event, our future. But what I was really doing was protecting my comfort. That's not love, that's cowardice. You loved her openly, fearlessly. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. And I'm sorry. I truly am. I hope someday you find someone who sees the way you fight for the people you love and realizes it's the most beautiful thing about you. I wasn't that man. But someone will be. Noah. Ava stared at the words, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't manipulative. For once, it didn't feel like Noah was trying to win anything. It felt honest. And that was what made it land harder than if he'd just sent more flowers or pleaded with a voicemail. She folded the letter and looked out the window, her thoughts tangled. She didn't miss him. That wasn't what this was. She didn't want to go back. But for the first time, she felt the absence of anger. Not forgiveness, not fully, but space. Room enough to set it down. Mason came in a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag from the garage. He glanced at her face and immediately slowed. Bad news? Just a letter, she said, holding it up. From Noah. He tilted his head, wary. He threatening you? Number apologizing. Huh. He didn't ask to read it. He just waited. Ava offered it to him anyway. He took it, read it once, twice, then set it back down on the table with a shrug. Sounds like he's finally realizing what he had. Too late. Way too late. Ava sat back in the chair, looking over at Emma, who was now adding birds to her, drawing. I don't hate him anymore, she said softly. I think I did. I think I needed to. But now, I just feel sad for him. Mason poured himself a cup of coffee. You know what that is? What? Healing. She smiled. You think? I know. He sat across from her. You're not reacting anymore. You're choosing. Ava folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not to keep, not really, but to put it away properly. Not in a trash bin, not in flames, just away. I think I needed to hear it, she admitted. Not for closure, just to know I wasn't crazy, that it really was wrong. You were never crazy, Mason said. You just loved someone who didn't understand how to hold your kind of love. Emma slid her drawing across the table then. It was a new one, this time 3 figures again, but this time they weren't holding hands. They were building something. A house, a small one, crooked, with a garden. Emma had drawn it with surprising detail. Flower beds, curtains in the windows, a chimney with smoke. Ava touched the corner of the page, her heart softening. She's trying to tell us something, she said. She wants roots. You all do, Mason said. And maybe it's time. Ava looked up at him. Are you sure you're okay with all of this? Me? Her? The noise? The chaos? He didn't hesitate. Ava, I don't see chaos. I see a family. She didn't cry. She just nodded, because if she opened that door too wide, she might not close it again. But something clicked into place in her chest. Something strong, quiet, and unshakable. Maybe love wasn't always loud or dramatic. Maybe sometimes it arrived in the form of steady hands, quiet rooms, and letters that didn't demand anything except to be read, and then set down. It happened on a Wednesday, just after the rain, the kind of soft, soaking rain that made everything smell like renewal. Ava was sitting on the porch steps, a blanket around her shoulders, and a chipped mug of tea warming her palms, when she heard it. Not a crash, not a cry, just the smallest sound, barely more than a whisper. But it stopped her cold. She turned, heart hammering. Emma was seated just inside the screen door, coloring as usual, her brow furrowed with quiet focus. Ava had brought her sketchbooks and crayons to the porch so they could enjoy the cool air without getting wet, and Mason was still at the garage, promising to be home by dinner. The world had been calm, ordinary, soft, until the sound. Ava stood slowly, afraid to startle her, afraid she'd imagined it. Emma? She asked gently. Her sister looked up, startled by the intensity in Ava's voice. Did you say something? Emma stared back at her. No movement, no nod, just those deep, searching eyes. Ava felt her hope begin to falter. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the quiet had played tricks on her. She turned slightly, ready to sit back down. And then, again, barely audible, barely real, came the sound. Ava. Just one word. Her name. Hoarse, raw, uncertain, but unmistakably from her sister's lips. Ava froze. She turned back around so fast her mug clattered to the porch floor, splashing tea onto the boards. She knelt in front of Emma, eyes wide. Say it again, she whispered. Emma's lips trembled. Her face was pale with fear, like she wasn't sure if she had done something wrong. Ava, she whispered again. 2 syllables, this time louder, this time with tears filling her eyes. Ava broke. She wrapped her arms around her sister, pulling her close, both of them shaking with emotion neither had words for. Oh my God, Em, she cried. You did it! You spoke! You said my name! Emma clung to her, making a small sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. They stayed there for what felt like hours, rocking gently, forehead to forehead. When Mason pulled into the driveway and saw the 2 of them on the porch, tangled in each other, he knew something had changed. He stepped out of the truck cautiously, scanning the scene with concern. Everything okay? He asked, approaching slowly. Ava looked up at him, her face wet, her eyes shining. She spoke, she said. She said my name. Mason blinked, stunned. He dropped to one knee beside them. Emma, he said softly. Is that true? Emma looked at him, her lower lip trembling, and then, Hi, she whispered. Just 1 syllable. But it knocked the wind from Mason's chest. He swallowed hard and blinked rapidly. Well, hey there, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick. Been waiting a long time to hear that. Ava laughed through her tears, the sound light and shaky. I don't know what triggered it. It just happened. You know what I think? Mason said. I think her world got safe enough, quiet enough, loved enough. That's what opened the door. They sat there together, the 3 of them, as the sun broke through the lingering clouds and poured golden light across the porch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie scene. It was better. It was real. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She kept replaying it, those 2 syllables, those soft consonants formed with effort and heart. She knew Emma might not speak regularly, that it might be days or weeks before another word came. But that didn't matter. The silence had been broken, and not by a doctor or a therapist or a forced exercise, but by love. Pure, patient love. Around midnight, Mason found her awake in the kitchen, staring at the same mug of tea she'd dropped earlier. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's too big. I feel like I'll miss something." "You won't," he said, pulling out a chair beside her. "You're here. That's enough." She looked at him. "You think it'll last?" "I think it doesn't have to be perfect to be progress." "You always know the right thing. To say, 'No, I just finally got someone who wants to hear it.'" She reached across the table and took his hand. They didn't speak for a while. The silence was full, not empty. And in that fullness, Ava felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because it was finally real. It wasn't planned. There were no invitations, no seating charts, no towering cake or matching napkins. There was no orchestra, no diamond ring, no arguments about centerpieces. Just a porch, a late afternoon sun, and a few people who had shown up not for a spectacle, but for something far rarer. Something honest. Ava stood barefoot in the soft grass behind Mason's house, wearing a simple cream dress she'd found at a thrift store 2 towns over. Her hair was half up, pinned loosely with a sprig of lavender Emma had tucked behind her ear that morning. She looked nothing like the bride she had once tried to be. She looked freer. Emma sat in her wheelchair beneath the old elm tree, holding a bouquet of hand-picked wildflowers and beaming with a pride that nearly undid Ava. Mason stood across from her in a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled to his forearms, suspenders holding up his well-worn slacks, and a quiet reverence in his eyes. The officiant, an old friend from Mason's garage crew who'd gotten ordained online just for this, cleared his throat and said, "We are gathered here, not because tradition demands it, but because 2 people have found in each other what the world often fails to offer: gentleness, patience, and a fierce, unshakable choice to love." There were no tears in Ava's eyes, just clarity. She had cried enough. Today wasn't about healing wounds, it was about starting new stories. When it was her turn to speak, she took Mason's hands and said, "You didn't rescue me. You didn't fix me. You stood beside me while I picked up the pieces. You waited. You listened. And when I was ready to stop surviving and start living, you were already there." Mason's voice was low and steady when he answered, "You taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who you show up for. I watched you choose Emma every single day, even when it cost you everything. That kind of love, it's the rarest thing in the world. And I get to wake up beside it now." There were only 6 guests. Emma, of course, and a few neighbors who'd helped build the ramp out back, and the waitress from the diner who'd offered them the quiet booth on their first morning after the fallout. Ava's father hadn't come. He'd written again, said he needed more time. That was okay. She no longer waited on people to change in order to move forward. After the ceremony, Mason pulled Ava close and whispered, "I know we didn't plan this." She smiled, leaning into his chest. "That's why it worked." Emma rolled over to them and handed Ava a drawing, a stick figure family again, but this time, the little house had a banner over it that read, "Home." Ava knelt, hugged her sister tightly, and said, "That's exactly what it is." They spent the evening around a fire pit, the air filled with the smell of toasted marshmallows and warm pine. Emma laughed more than she had in years, and when the fireflies blinked into view, she whispered, "Pretty," softly enough for Ava and Mason to hear, and softly enough that it felt like a miracle. When the last guest left and the stars took over the sky, Mason wrapped a blanket around Ava's shoulders and said, "So, Mrs. Carter, what now?" She smiled up at him. "Now? We just keep building. A life, a family, a place where no one ever has to wonder if they belong." "Sounds perfect," he said. "It's not," she replied. "But it's real, and that's even better." He kissed her forehead, and they watched the fire die down to embers. Ava thought of the day she'd stood outside that church, holding her sister's hand and thinking everything had ended. She had been wrong. That day hadn't been an ending. It had been the clearest beginning she'd ever lived. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on General Common Tales. If you'd watched them throw her out, would you have stayed silent or walked with her too? Tell us in the comments.